The following is a production of New Mexico State University.
I hope you, thank you very much.
That's a good one.
You like that one?
I think we had one of the most powerful public policy conferences ever held in the great state of New Mexico in the last day and a half.
Hey, look at that one. When was this one?
We have a couple of our,
I don't know.
we have a couple of our speakers. I thought I saw David Walker and Dr. Marron here a while ago. Someone, well, David, yeah, yeah, he's right here. These economists hide out a lot. Being one myself, you got to be shifty and change jobs quickly and often and frequently and that kind of thing.
I got the chills.
I wanted to, and here's David Walker was with us too. He did a wonderful job with Dr. Marron talking about financial matters. This evening is kind of a casual event, kind of like a cocktail party at your house, kind of a conversation. And let me show you how this works. What you do is you say, Kathy, would you bring me a glass of wine, please? And she wants to know if I want hors d'oeuvres. Oh, yes, please, honey, while you're at it. And let the cat out on the way by, would you please?
Birthday lady.
So we wanted to be, we thought it would be nice to have kind of a casual evening. We've got our great senator and former congresswoman here, and I'm going to ask them to kind of engage in conversation. But the Domenici Institute and the Domenici legacy is celebrated here for Senator Pete Domenici and his great wife Nancy and the family. And I just wanted to point out something over here. If you haven't seen it, Michael Rickenbacker and his people have been very active in trying to get together the right kind of drawings and everything. But if you can see it, this is the building that we're proposing to put the Domenici Institute. It'll be a College of Business building, but the Domenici Institute will be embedded in that, as well as the Arrowhead Center, which Senator Domenici helped fund for a long period of time. And it's a beautiful building, 3 stories, about 100,000 square feet, Michael?
110.
Oh, the architect's already chiseling on me. He's starting to take square footage out of it. Based on availability of funds. But this will be in the central campus. For those of you who know the campus, it looks right over at Milton Hall. It's right by the Zool Library. And in time, probably not in my time or Coach Henson's time, but they're going to remove Milton Hall, and that will be the center of the campus. It'll be a beautiful grassy area with trees, and this will look right over that where the students hang out. And by then, I'm going to guess it's going to be one of the most beautiful campuses around. So this is a building where first priority by New Mexico State University going forward. And this is how one of the other ways that we're trying to remember Senator Pete Domenici and his lovely wife Nancy and all their contributions to the state of New Mexico. Now I'm going to ask my colleagues to come up here. Kathy has not delivered the wine, but that's not uncommon. Sometimes it takes 2 and 3 requests to get the job done. But I'm going to ask him to come up here and join me, and we'll have a little conversation. And then along the way, maybe you'd like to, it's kind of a cocktail party at our house, and maybe you'd like to ask a question or two. But let me ask a couple, 3 to get things going. And then perhaps some of you would want to join in and ask some questions of my friends that are visiting my house here.
Just got to use this arm. Sit next to me.
Okay, we already tore up one lavalier mic, and I'm told that we shouldn't probably have all 3 of them on here at one time. You all know Senator Domenici, but most of you know Congresswoman Heather Wilson from Albuquerque. And she's a longtime friend, and I noticed she was really in her element when the general from the Air Force, who's an Air Force... oh, okay. Did you notice that? One of my colleagues in the College of Business brought this. I think this has to do with my comment that I can't pay you anymore, but we'll think highly of you as we go along the way. Thank you very much, Dr. Peach. But Heather Wilson, as those of you may know, and I think probably everyone here knows, is a graduate of the Air Force Academy. Yeah. And then she went to Oxford and received 2 degrees. She has a PhD from that great university. And then she came back and worked, I do know that she frequently briefed the National Security Council, worked in the National Security Council, and ultimately drifted back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and married and had children. and was elected to the Congress. But before that, she also served as the Secretary of Children, Youth, and Family under Governor Gary Johnson. She's been very active in public affairs all of her life. And so we're delighted, and a very good friend of both Senator Domenici and myself. So we're delighted to have her in this little conversation. So,
Thank you, Joe.
so I was just thinking of sitting around here having my glass of wine, which Dr. Peach brought me, and probably shouldn't drink before the evening's over. We might get really political or something here. But I was sitting around thinking about the great conference we had, and we talked about nuclear energy, and we talked about border issues. We had some conversations about health care reform. We worried a lot about the debt. We talked about national security. And I'm sitting here with two of my colleagues and myself who once ran for office, and I know at least two of us are never going to do that again. You'll have to figure out who the two are, but two of us are never going to do that again. But I was thinking to myself, if I were to seek public office in New Mexico again, Senator, if I were you, which of those issues we covered today would be kind of the core of your campaign? What would you want to tell the people in New Mexico if you were to seek office again?
Well, I think it's unavoidable have to talk about the subject that is the most important thing to America and America's future and our young people's future, and that's the deficit, the national debt. And at that point, I have to hope that I'm not in a position where I'm culpable as being one that caused most of it to happen, because I think somebody running against me that didn't have much to do with it would have a real head start, because I believe it's not just a matter of time. It's almost there, but it's a matter of time till it becomes a pervasive issue unless politicians and leaders are able to do something about it and give some hope, because it's going to peak in terms of millions and millions of Americans understanding that if we were in a private world, we'd be seeking bankruptcy lawyers as our helpers, because it's going to be hard for us to pay our bills, for America to pay our bills. So why that be cinched? That would be the number one issue.
Can I?
Go right ahead. Are you on?
Hello.
You
They
have
do
to
this to me all the time.
You have to push a button somewhere.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Test 1, 2, 3. This way I got to shut up the governor.
He can't talk.
If this one starts to work, let me know. David talked this afternoon about it's a whole lot easier to ask for people in public life to eat their dessert and not their spinach, I think is what you said. How, and you've always been wonderful in public life about not only seeing what we need to do, but figuring out how we get there. So with respect to the deficit and the debt, how would you get the Congress and the administration to get on a path towards fiscal responsibility?
Well, frankly, I've been so far away from the idea of running that I haven't thought of this. But let me say the first thing I would do as a leader would be to try to get as many people, many members from both sides of the aisle to join together and try to take the issue out of politics and try to convince each other that it was time, maybe one of the unique times in our history, that the issue is so big that a group of leaders from the Congress, both sides of the aisle, have to sit down and say, we can't approach this in a normal way. We got to approach it completely different and put it together as a non-political campaign, and then go to the president if we had to and say, we'd like to join you, or we'd like you to join us. It's going to get to a point where, my prediction, some great American leadership is going to evolve out of this. Is it going to come from Congress? It should, but I don't know that we can do it. I gave my summary when I started. Gary, you recall my opening remarks about this. You said a pretty good way to start it, and I said, can Congress cope? I think that's the way I would answer you. I'm not sure Congress can cope. So it's going to be some way of percolating up, and leadership is going to get together somehow and push this as a non-partisan, as a non-political issue for the protection, preservation, and survival of America.
Heather, seems to me like we have some structural issues. We heard a lot about changes that need to be made, and I guess we're not going to be able to operate this one. Is this one on? The lavalier on? You can hear it? Okay. But it seems to me like if we're going to solve this rather dramatic deficit that we're running right now, something's got to give, don't you think? I mean, what's going to give? I was listening to speakers today, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, they're making a lot of sense. This debt's a serious problem. But what are you going to do? What are you going to cut? What's got to go? You read in the paper this morning that the state of New Mexico, they ran a poll, and it said the people in New Mexico would rather cut back than increase taxes. So let's just assume that's a national attitude. What are you going to do when you have these kind of deficits? What do you cut?
I could come up with a list, but it's going to be different than somebody else's list, which is usually the problem. But there's a proposal in the Congress now that some folks have put forward, including Steny Hoyer, who I know is a good friend of yours.
Yes.
That says we need to do this like we did the BRAC Commission. Like he said, look, this is an extremely difficult problem. We know it's politically difficult. We need to set up a special process to move this forward. Do you think that would work, or do you think we should consider something like that?
Well, I think we're going to get to the point where very quickly that we find out that there's no alternative, that we're going to have to form some kind of a commission. I introduced a bill 3 years ago with Senator Feinstein. There are a couple of others. David Walker's been involved in a lot of them, including a broader concept of commission, because the problems are so pervasive that you might have to find a way to come at it where the solution takes a long time. The solution is that first this, second that, third that, but you put them all in place so that you have sent a message that you know how to do it and you can't do it all at once. Gary, I'm not sure, in response to your question, now I'm a Republican who hates to say this, but I'm not sure that even with the changes in Social Security that are going to have to happen, and changes in Medicare that are going to have to happen, and those are the big ones. You can't get these savings out of the bills, the appropriation bills that fund our national parks. This is big time money, and the big time money is in the veterans' health care and Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. So as far as I can tell, you're going to have taxes also, and they're going to have to be done in a way where they're phased in or they're conditional. Now, people here may believe this and may not instantly react negatively and say Pete's gone crazy. Maybe you won't because you heard some real facts today. But I think the American people aren't there yet, aren't at that point yet, and the Republican leadership is not. And I think the Democrats would be scared to death to take it. But you'll get to the point where we can't. What if we literally right around the corner we can't pay our debts and we've got to prime the pump, and everybody finds out that what we're getting is cheap money. And you know, let me just say something about cheap money. If we have to prime the pump, so we're paying off these debts with our money, but it's different money. What I see about it is that it is a gradual invitation to poorness, P-O-O-R-ness, each year. You get a little poorer as you do this because the money you use is a little less valuable. So it seems right, but it doesn't feel right. And pretty soon you're going to find out the reason it doesn't feel right is because I'm getting poor. And I don't know whether tranquility, one of the words we use about promote tranquility, I don't know how tranquility is going to fare in an America that's never had anything like this if this happens.
In the body politic, we have a tendency to kind of put things off if we can. You all have looked at trying to reform Social Security in the past, and it's always a dangerous subject to bring up.
I tried.
But how much time do we have? I mean, I heard some stories today that were pretty frightening, that this debt is going to be such a tremendous burden on children How much time? Do we have time to put this off a year, 2, 3?
Well, we're gonna. I know I really haven't sat down and done that. I just know the big numbers and what a giant percent of GDP we are now at in terms of the debt ratio. And the United States did this once before, but if you look back on the records, it's interesting. It was an American commitment to win a war, so up went the ratio to a big pinnacle up here, and it was so high you couldn't survive. But listen here, it came right back down. I mean, like this. The American leadership said, whoa, that's for win the war, now that's over with. And they cut the budget so fast, people thought it was too fast. It turned out we made it. But they did that because they were leaders of concern that you couldn't have that kind of deficit. That up there was the debt that was about as big as we're going to have when we're in real trouble. And that's because we were buying all this stuff to beat Hitler and win over there, and we had no alternative. Prime the pump the money, get it going, borrow the money, but we were easy borrowed. The public lent us the money then. We owed ourselves that money, didn't we? Almost all of it. I don't think we owed any foreign countries.
Can I change the subject on you?
Please do. And we're supposed to be, you're not supposed to just be quizzing me, you're a member of Congress too.
I'll yield to the gentleman if you would.
I know a gentleman's got a closed lip.
I remember sitting next to you once, I think it was when we opened the Z machine in Sandia or something, one of the projects in Sandia, and you just leaned over to me and you said, I just love big science. I love big science.
Big science.
What for you are the big science challenges that this nation needs to take on in the next 2 decades?
Well, frankly, I've said it even worse than that. I've said I'm a sucker for big science. And I said that publicly, and I meant that seriously because I have participated in funding big science where it didn't work, where we wasted a lot of money, and the scientists convinced me, and might say they conned me, and that we spent money and it didn't work. But what I see as the problem with science is not a list of big science, because I don't know what the list is, but the United States of America has it could happen that we fall behind in everything if we don't really fund science, because the countries that are giving us static, China, India, are going to graduate more engineers, more PhDs and the like. They're also going to, that education yields science, and that education seeks breakthroughs. And so they're going to be out there pushing for the same things. So I would say we got to keep things like the National Institute of Science strong. We've got to keep it clean, where it's doing the kind of work that it should, where it's picking the right projects and no partisanship and no playing games. We've got to make sure that the projects that we take on have the backing of great science leaders in our country, and then back them. Even though we're short of money and we're in this condition we're in, it does not mean that we can close our ears and our mind to the kind of things you're talking about, big science and science needs. We're going to have to do those if we're not going to get out of the bog. We're not going to crawl out of the foxhole, which we got to do. So I don't know which projects, which program, which instruments, but I do know what I just said is, in my opinion, the right way. We've got to keep on following the advice of the best. And inherent in that is we've got to keep a tough, vibrant university system with reference to science and research in particular. Now, I'm going to jump the whole other way and tell you that there is a major study that says all that's true, Senator, but the way you're falling behind and what may break your back is the fact that we've got about 650,000 school teachers that are teaching our young kids in the 4th grade through the 12th. They're supposed to be teaching them math and science, and they don't know math and science. So I might have answered your question by saying, let's retool the 650,000 teachers, and that's the best ticket to science availability and science competitiveness by the United States. And nobody is... I don't know why the White House hasn't taken that one. And during this, spending this money to stimulate the economy with something like $300-400 million, $500 million a year for 5 or 6, 7 years, they could almost reteach, retool the entire corps of teachers. And incidentally, if you're wondering, can it be done? Do we know how to do it? There's a superb academy at Los Alamos. It started 5 years ago when we first pushed our laboratories to get involved, and it is a math and science academy. And that sounds like an academy for bright students, but it's actually an academy to produce teachers in 3 years, take them out of the school system, and part-time and 2 summers, they become certified as real math and science teachers. It costs a lot of money for each one, but I sent it to the White House, and of course I'm not really intimate there, but somebody should get started with this. And maybe I'm going to push it in New Mexico and get some leaders to say, let's do it in New Mexico, because we know how. We just borrow them, borrow the lab people, and do it.
Heather, we had an outstanding general from the United States Air Force Academy talk about technology and science and the things that we're trying to do here. And I think he spoke to the issue of education and universities and that sort of thing, and spoke that actually universities have a big role to play in their staying kind of at the frontier. I was pretty fascinated with some of the technology that he talked about. But he didn't mention the future combat systems.
Boy.
And that's kind of dear to our hearts here. And do you have any clue as to what maybe the potential of future combat systems is? And he didn't mention it. Kind of bothered me just a little bit.
He was very Air Force.
Very Air Force.
Although I saw Jim Tegnelli on the way in, and the one thing that both he noticed and I noticed was he still had a manned aircraft in the loop. There were no UAVs there, as examples, which is, very much like a pilot. I can't tell you, where the future combat system is, and they've got the quadrennial defense review going, and a lot of those decisions are kind of already in train. But the way we equip our soldiers going forward is vastly different than the way we equipped our soldiers even 5 to 10 years ago. And it all has to do with technology and information, and getting the information to the warfighter. I was on the National Security Council staff in the first Gulf War. And I remember that intelligence products, pictures, could get to 2-star generals within 24 hours. It was a really big deal for them to make decisions. Today, those same pictures are available real time on laptops to captains and sergeants, so that they can look around the corner as to what they're seeing. Now as soon as you do that, it's like the iPhone. I didn't know I needed that app until I saw one, right? So what you thought would be the demand for that information isn't. Once one sergeant has it, every sergeant has to have it. So there's a huge increase in demand for information. It also increases our dependence and hence our vulnerability. And one of the things I wish General Cartwright had been able to be here to talk about today was the new cyber command that's being stood up next month, and the vulnerability of the United States to cyber attack, and the change in the way in which we're going to deal with that. It will change the way in which we think about warfare going forward.
Are we kind of early in setting up this command, or late? Because
get set up next month.
But I kind of got the impression from listening to the general that this problem has been around for a little while, and there's only recently a grave concern about the potentials of cyber terrorism and that kind of thing. But it seems to me like we've been reading about it and hearing about it for, 2 or 3 or 4 years.
certainly 2 or 3 or 4 years. I graduated from the academy in '82. The general who spoke was 2 years ahead of me, so I was thinking, that guy probably made me do push-ups.
He's what?
When I was the last class that was issued a slide rule. We got a slide rule, and we also got a TI-53 calculator. When I was a senior at the academy, I had my comp-sci course, computer science, and the basic computer science course, and every cadet has to have it. And we did decks of cards and ran them through a mainframe computer. 1982, the year I graduated, was the year that IBM built the first desktop computer. It was a major, and they weren't linked to anything. They had 4-inch, those little 4-inch floppy disk things, and you put it in, the screen was green. Remember that? And it cost you $2,500. I remember that. That was in 1982. The 1996 Telecommunications Act, the last major change to telecommunication law in this country, probably 500-600 pages long, does not contain the word internet. 1996. This is how fast things are changing. We're taking advantage of it in our national security in the weapons that we deploy, but it is also a tremendous vulnerability. Because if you are that sergeant who's depending on that screen to come up to tell you what's around the next corner, and all of a sudden you don't have that picture, or you think you have that picture, and it's a different picture than what's actually there. If you think you know what's coming in over the pole in your air defense systems, but it's false data, you've got a real problem. So it creates both vulnerabilities as well as tremendous national advantages. And I think we've woken up to both sides of that coin within the last 5 years.
Seems to me it's going to be a major challenge going forward for all countries, but in our country in particular, I suppose. I also was somewhat intrigued by the conversation from Secretary Napolitano and our friend from Mexico. And the conversation went something, generally the thrust of that conversation was, we need to cooperate.
Yeah.
Well, heavens forbid, I thought we cooperated in the past. What have we not been cooperating with them? What's the issue here?
Well, first, before we leave science, I want to just mention that here we have a citizen right here, Larry Stolarsik. Just put up your hand, Larry. Larry Stolarsik has a manufacturing plant in Raton, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And imagine that, 40 employees. And he's in the business of producing, what would you say your expertise is? What? Okay. In any, I helped him get an earmark for that. But anyway, believe it or not, coming from little old Raton, the major piece of equipment that goes on a vehicle in Iraq and Afghanistan that detects the wires that make those roadside bombs explode, that comes from Raton, New Mexico, and from this guy's great fertile mine. He's a tremendous mining engineer and expert, and that's what he's contributed to the war effort. And believe you me, I've worked with him for 10 or 12 years trying to get his products in the Defense Department. And it's tough for a little guy. Mm-hmm. You get him in, you think it's there, and all of a sudden you're out. But anyway, he struggled, and he finally has a wonderful company, and he came all the way, I guess, as far as you can come, right? Raton to Las Cruces. Right. Can't drive any further.
Well, the thing that made him great is he graduated from New Mexico State University. So.
Well, let me just, without being the least bit offensive, and on this Mexican border issue that you just alluded to, I think it's been very difficult for the United States to get together with Mexico and to do positive things, because immigration and the fact that we have this common border, and this common border, aside from being common on the maps of the world, is about as uncommon as anything, because on one side for all these years has been the most powerful economic nation on earth with the highest standard of living. On the other side has been a country that's relatively poor, if not in many areas poverty-stricken, and that kind of border is not easy to generate a spirit of cooperation, at least that both sides think they are, or of amicability, and that's what we've lived with. And it's been almost ignored by American leadership and said if it just goes away, wonderful. And now it can't go away because the assassinations and gangland activities, it's causing Americans to be very worried about America. So there's a different attitude. And I have a strong feeling that for the first time, we're going to come out of this real good friends. And we're going to come out of this with a different feeling toward each other. And then on that border will be 5, 6, or 7 kind of cities of great growth where Mexico will get most of its new jobs, and there'll be foreign investments by the billions on the Mexican side and on the American side by us. And that's already showing up in Juarez and a couple of other places where the Chinese are bringing in big investment. I think that's going to, and this president has been a powerhouse in terms of commitment to try to do what a president should do. And I think his people are going to end up very happy with him. They haven't had that over the years. And I think we were apt to come out with that word that we're going to cooperate, or being cooperative. I don't think we're going to be much different than we've been, but I think it's going to be called cooperation where it wasn't before.
Legend has it that President Bush was willing to engage because of his position in Texas, and that he was very interested in doing work with Mexico, and then 9/11 happened, and we just became terribly distracted.
I think you're
and
right.
Both of you were in Congress. Do you have the sense that maybe at one time we were on the road to maybe doing something different and was distracted by 9/11?
I think the priorities changed to security and making this country safe, and people realized that we were much more vulnerable than we thought we were. And
you got it.
So it did.
Do we really have security issues coming up through Mexico, in that the border is 2,000 miles, I thought I saw today, and it's mostly barbed wire fence? We do have part of a fence built across there, but is that a grave concern to us to worry about infiltration from Mexico? We seem to watch ports and airports and things of that more than we seem to watch the border. Yeah. What do you think, Congresswoman? You're our intelligence specialist. Is that a grave concern of ours?
I'm more concerned about its impact on healthcare and jobs and those kinds of things. It is a vulnerability. The folks who say, by God, let's build a fence. Well, you build a 14-foot fence and they'll build a 15-foot ladder. I mean, this is not the barriers alone do not provide security. It's a combination of policies and people and systems to make it highly likely that if someone crosses the border illegally, they are caught and sent back to their country of origin, and that those who come here legally, like they have to through our airports or seaports.
There's some.
I think that indeed those who make America vulnerable by acts of terrorism and ideas of bringing things in that will cause damage if they get them in here, they've just not focused on Mexico, in my opinion. And we've been lucky that they haven't, because there's great vulnerability. It's just that they've chosen other approaches to the United States. But now with the gangland type wars, Mexico has got more security on the border than they ever had, and we do too. And it might just work out that that's not going to be as vulnerable as it might have been, but for this very bad thing that's happened on the border.
There are some who believe that their republic might be in jeopardy as a result of the strength of the cartels and the number of weapons they have. Is that something that come before you ever? Is that something we should be concerned about?
I've never heard it come up in any committees or anything. And listening to that minister today, I don't think that their governments is falling apart, which is essentially what you're addressing, that their apparatus of government won't work, and there'll be takeovers and the like. I don't think that's happening. And the thing that I was most impressed with, and I caused the answer because I made him talk about assassinations, but when the minister said that of all the gangland killings, now I don't mean killing one group of people is different than another, they're all murders, they're all deaths, but only 2 to 3% of the killings are citizens, just average folks. The rest of them are gangland involvement people. They're on one side or the other of the shooting gang. So when we read about the killing, it isn't like all of them are not mayors and police chiefs. Most of the killings are people that are out there trying to kill the other guy and they get killed. So I think maybe they can clean it up. I think the difficulty is you don't know who's your friend and who's your foe, and that's why Janet Napolitano indicated vetting. She used the word vetting, I think, meaning you've got to know by vetting this person, you got to find out who he is. Was he really on your side or did he come from somewhere else? That's a tough problem.
Mm-hmm. How about the issue that seems to capture the country at the moment under the leadership of the president is healthcare reform. Mm-hmm. And we have a number of different notions. We have public option or no public option. We heard today that we might, for example, have to cut the amount that we pay physicians and others who provide health care. Where do you go with this issue? It seems to me like politically, not only a tough one, but one that one probably ought to stay as far away as they possibly could until somebody comes up with a better idea. How about you? How would you do this? You were in Children, Youth, and Family Department. You know the importance of health care. What are we supposed to be doing about this?
I actually served on the Health Subcommittee in Energy and Commerce for the 10 years I was in the Congress. I think that if there was one thing that I say that I was not able to make progress on, it had to do with reform, particularly in my case, Medicaid, to try to get to, there's always these big fights about how much money you're going to put in, and is it going to be a 7.6% increase or a 7.4% increase, and nobody was looking at how do we get more for the dollars we spend, and how do we improve the health status of Americans so that it is less costly. I think the reforms and the bills that I've seen thus far do not focus enough on the problem of cost. If cost continues to escalate the way it is, and continues to outstrip, the rate of increase continues to outstrip the increase in regular inflation and wages, it doesn't matter whether the government's paying for it or it's coming out of your pocket or your employer's pocket. We won't be able to afford it because it will continue to increase cost beyond anyone's capacity to pay. So you have to address cost. And I think that's one of the things that's not being addressed as well as it needs to be. I also think that when people say, there were 48 million people who were uninsured sometime last year or who were uninsured last year, you need to break that down into who they were and why they were uninsured. A remarkable percentage of those people actually made more than $70,000 a year last year. And they were between jobs or they chose not to have health insurance. Somebody who's making $35,000 a year in Albuquerque, New Mexico should not be subsidizing the insurance coverage from somebody who's making $70,000 a year and didn't want to buy it. So breaking down the problem to address the problems as they are, make sure that we have a minimal amount of health care available and it's accessible, and we have to tackle the problem of long-term care. Right now in Medicaid, 1/3 of the cost of Medicaid is the cost of long-term care.
And nobody's even talking about it in this debate. Nobody's even talking about it in this big debate.
No. And it's the fastest growing part of Medicaid.
Well, Gary, let me, and Heather, let me just add a few thoughts here. I want to hearken back to 2005 and the passage of the Energy Policy Act. The Energy Policy Act is the only major piece of legislation in the last 12 years or 10 years or so that was truly a bipartisan product. Now, what do I mean? What I mean is that the chairman, happened to be me, the ranking member happened to be Jeff Bingaman. We decided we would produce a bipartisan bill, which is almost like saying a joint bill. Not one side prepares it and gives it to the other, and says, offer a few amendments, and now we're doing it bipartisan. It's a kind of a joint preparation. The staff worked it together. We moved it along, and I ran it, and I knew how far I could push. And then if the senator wouldn't go anymore, I knew how to get to another subject. And, you know, in about 8 months of that, you get a good bill. I would hope that if this health care doesn't pass, that maybe we could get somebody to draw a bill like the bill that way. And why do I say that? Because in my humble opinion, we're already too involved in health care to draw a bill that goes into effect rather quickly that changes everything. I think you have to piecemeal it, and the biggest thing missing from the discussion, it would be a joint starter that would say how much of this coverage should be catastrophic coverage. I mean, after all, there's about 10 million or more people who don't want to buy insurance who are very healthy. I mean, if you have a young 25-year-old that's in your household that's making a living, he doesn't care about it. But he cares if he has an automobile wreck, right? Right. Because he's got to pay, he's got a catastrophic problem. Well, maybe, or somebody shows up with a serious mental illness at about 17, schizophrenia, it comes on between 17 and 20-something, and you got the mom and pop and you got a bill, you better have catastrophic coverage. Well, we could have put one together with catastrophic starting, phasing it out, and you would have got cheap coverage, and in the meantime, you could have used the things we have, like emergency systems. If any of you have been in an emergency of a hospital, emergency center of a hospital, you will find that it is a health facility. You go there, you get the best health care in America because litigation has caused that. Mm-hmm. So there's a health center. There are health centers all over. And we don't have to throw those out. They could be used in the 10-year implementation of a new bill, right? We got all these community health centers. I mean, we started back when I was first a senator. We've got hundreds upon hundreds of community health centers for the poor. We could have used those as part of a phase-in of health care instead of jumping in and saying, how are we going to cover 45 million Americans that aren't covered, which is almost, for writing legislation, is beyond the capability without computers or machines that did it for you. You can't think it through. It's too mixed up. So that's my one thought, and I don't know, I've heard some other people allude to catastrophic, but I haven't heard it alluded to back there, except for Judd Gregg, who introduced a bill, somewhat like I'm talking about, which I thought was a brilliant bill, but nobody cares. Why? Because they didn't start jointly. They write a bill and send it over. What if they had started jointly and Judd Gregg would have submitted his bill and said, well, let's talk about catastrophic. At least Americans would hear it and perk up their ears and say, maybe it makes sense.
I think healthcare insurance probably started with hospitalization. The big cost back years and years ago. Hospitalization, so you buy a little hospitalization policy. And I think Kathy and I, when we had our first child, may have had, because it's probably $250, $300 to have the first child. The child since cost us millions of dollars, but at least we started low. We started on the economy plan. But it started out that way. We kept adding benefits, and there were expectations. There were union negotiations that added benefits. And Senator Brown mentioned today in a conversation that the Oregon situation where in Medicaid, they've flat had to go around the state, hold hearings, and just limit the benefits. Now, tell me about the political will of being able to do that. Now, Oregonians apparently were able to do it. In fact, I think the fellow that led that charge was a physician, actually became governor of the state after he did that.
You're right.
But it seems like maybe what we're looking for is maybe the political will to kind of trim back the benefit plans. The Medicaid plan in New Mexico is the richest healthcare benefit plan in the whole state. No company has a benefit plan better than Medicaid here. Is there political will to that?
Now, to be fair, one of the things that Medicaid does cover is people who could not get health care coverage any other way because they are seriously disabled.
That's true.
Those folks, no matter what, in some way, we're going helping and supporting those. I mean, if you have a child who's born with a terrible, terrible infirmity, that is a huge health expense that's never going to be covered by insurance. So setting those aside, there is an argument that says that we should go back to catastrophic coverage being what insurance is for, and that a lot of the other things we pay for should be paid out of pocket. And the argument has to do with both direct relationships with your physician rather than a third party in there deciding whether you can see this doc or not, and also the control of costs. If you look at things that are not normally covered by insurance, LASIK surgery, chiropractic care, elective plastic surgery, the cost increase for those procedures is much closer to the regular rate of inflation. Why? Because a consumer is making a decision about where they get their care. And the average person who gets elective plastic surgery goes to 3 different doctors. Same with LASIK. And so, eyeglasses, there's another one. When I was a kid, eyeglasses were expensive and you could ugly and you could only get them from your doctor, right? They got rid of that monopoly and you can walk into Walmart and for $12.95 buy a pair of reading specs. And they're not that ugly.
And they look pretty nice, don't you think?
So bringing back the consumer part of making choices in healthcare and having insurance be for those things that none of us could anticipate and that we want to make sure that we're all covered for.
I do want to make sure that even though I'm not running, so I can say something here that doesn't look so good when it's quoted. I want to make sure that when I said phase in, and I used examples of what we could continue to use, and not assume we're going to throw it away and cover everybody with the existing within the main frame of healthcare. I did not mean to imply that there should be 2 tiers of coverage, that we should have one set of coverage in emergency rooms for one group of people and elsewhere. I just meant that there's a lot of available facility and healthcare capacity that could be phased in and make this thing a little bit easier, and maybe give the taxpayer a break, and maybe put in something that wouldn't just make the cost didn't explode. Remember, for those who say this is only going to cost so much, we haven't had much luck with that in healthcare estimating. I mean, Medicaid was passed, and the numbers are in the congressional record as to what we estimated, but it ends up costing, I don't remember, 100 times as much as Russell Long said it would cost on the floor as he managed it, because that's hard to estimate, and healthcare is changing so fast that it's hard for those people estimating it to figure out where's it really going. So I would think everything in healthcare reform is going to cost more than we expected, and people are going to be very angry. The insurance premiums are going to be more expensive. If you think you're going to add to the insurance pools, that they've got to cover those people who have previous injuries, and the price isn't going to go up, it's got to go up. Somebody's got to pay for it. It's very expensive, and we want to cover it. We want to make the pool big enough, of coverage with the goods and the not so goods, and the very sick and not so sick, so that it won't be too expensive. But it won't go down when you add that to the coverage, when you make the coverage broader.
It's pretty hard to visualize to me how we can reduce the cost of health care without dealing with the benefit plans. There's a lot of talk about inefficiencies in the system and so on, but I have a difficult time thinking we can achieve the kind of savings they're looking at just from that. I've had a number of friends drop in for a glass of wine and some cheese, and I'll bet some of them have a question or two they might want to ask. I see one in the back there.
Yeah, I know all of you address this quite a bit, but talk a little bit about mental health treatment and where you see this going in the future. I'm sure the answer is not good, but I was just interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, as of now, the status of the United States law is that insurance companies cannot write health care insurance and cover the mentally ill in the insurance coverage without, they can't do that, and and have any less coverage for the mentally ill than is available for any other illness. So if you cover the mentally ill, you've got to cover them the same as you cover cancer. That is, in number of hospital days, all those things that go with it. That's the law of the land. So whenever we're talking about it, that's implied and in there. Now, if that's what you're talking about, that's the answer. If you're talking about are we making any headway in the care and treatment of the mentally ill, that's another subject. And I guess one could say, you bet we are making some dramatic changes, but certainly not fast enough, and certainly we're not doing a very good job of taking care of those people in society that we know are seriously mentally ill, because we don't have the facilities to take care of them. So most of the mass murders that are occurring in our cities, by mass we mean 3 or more or 5 or more, any of them that you read a story and it says 9 people shot in a grade school such and such. Take it from your senator, your first reaction should be, well, I'll bet the person that did it is mentally ill and had already been in a treatment center, maybe once or twice, and didn't take their meds, and it turned out that 9 out of 10 times you're right. By the time they get around to looking at it, that's what it is. So that's sort of pathetic, because if we're going to have the mentally ill on the streets, we ought to have adequate facilities to keep them, because sooner or later they're going to do something very, very bad, because in a sense they are really crazy. And they're in the time the schizophrenic acts, they're acting in a rather bizarre, crazy manner. So we're not doing very well there, but the research as to how to solve it is making great strides, great strides.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, I'm Chris Erickson. I'm in the Department of Economics at NMSU, and I'm one of the people that the dean esteems but doesn't pay very well. But my wife is also a science teacher at Chaparral High School, which is in the Gadsden School District, one of the poorest school districts in the country. And the problem she has is not that she doesn't know content. You were talking about the Los Alamos program where you help teachers gain content. My wife is very competent when it comes to content. Her problem is that she spends too much time filling out forms, filling out federal forms, a lot of those, and then also some state forms, but really it becomes quite a chore for our teachers to deal with that kind of paperwork. I was wondering if you could think of some way we could get around that, or some solution to that problem.
Say a couple of things. I actually supported the No Child Left Behind Act,
Sure.
because I think it tried to focus on results rather than on trying to micromanage the process. I think that once it got through its first 3 or 4 years, it needed to be tweaked and reauthorized and improved. There were things that needed to be changed, and some of those things are still there that need to be changed. I mean, I don't think it makes any sense to try to test kids who are special ed kids on standardized tests. It's demoralizing for them, and it doesn't make any sense. I also think that there needs to be more granularity on what success means. Right now, there are 47 ways to fail, and you have to get them all right to say you're succeeding, those kinds of things. I'm a big believer on not trying to micromanage process, in forcing teachers to spend their time filling out forms to satisfy administrators. And a big believer in giving teachers the tools and training they need to succeed in the classroom. Whether that's at the state level or the school district level or the school level, supporting and finding those kind of teachers, particularly in math and science. And, God bless your wife, but there aren't enough science and math teachers teaching math and science in this state. And why do kids get inspired about math and science? Well, I think enthusiasm is caught. It's not taught. They found somebody, there was somebody who inspired them, who touched their life and said, I got to show you this. This is really cool, right? And got them involved in the process of discovery. And they found that they were just as fascinated and excited about it. And that's what creates a great science teacher or a great math teacher. And you can't do that by filling out forms. So whether it's driven by Santa Fe or the Gadsden District or a particular principal or the federal government, I'm less concerned about the forms than I am about the results, and we need to focus on what's happening in the mind of the child.
I was actually discouraged from science having caused an explosion in the chemistry lab in high school.
I have to tell you the story.
And so there can be encouragement and discouragement.
Well,
In this particular case, they told me to try to become an economist or something harmless like that.
My daughter had to do science fair, and she was in 6th grade, not really inspired by her science teacher, but we had to, I have a bumper sticker, I survived science fair. I don't know, for my super. But she came up, she wanted to look at the boiling points of different liquids. Well, so we did, water and vinegar and oil or whatever it was in the kitchen. We got to the oil and we broke the thermometer at a certain temperature, and then it burst into flame on the stove. And we dealt with that. One of her conclusions, honest to God, on her, put it right up there on her board. My daughter does what she wants to do. She's kind of like her mom. But one of her conclusions from this experiment was, science is a lot more exciting at home.
That's good. Sherman.
Terrific.
As we talk about the cost of health care and the cost of education and the national debt, sometimes I also hear that the number of Americans who actually pay taxes outside of Social Security is a shrinking number. How do we address this vested interest concept outside of the
well, most of what's happened to the tax code that yields the results you're talking about is by design. I mean, we have taken people off the rolls. We've described who's going to pay and taken more and more off the rolls with the passage of every new tax bill. I think that was a mistake. We got started at it. I voted to start that trend, and I remember Senator Lawton Childs, a great friend of mine, a Democrat from Florida. He voted against it. Said, "Why'd you do that?" And his answer was, "No, you're wrong, Pete. Everybody that makes a good living ought to pay some tax, even if it's a small amount, because they ought to be made to feel that they're part of government, and when the government wastes money and spends money, it's partly theirs." So I think we're on the wrong path, and that part that's not paying is growing. I don't remember the number. It's big now. 50, 60% don't pay. What is it?
40 to 50, headed to 50.
Headed toward don't pay. That's I'm not so sure if you're going to have an income tax system as your basic source of revenue for your country. That's very good, but that's the trend we're on.
Coach?
Could I jump back to education
sure, yeah.
for a minute?
Just a second, Coach.
Let me jump back to education. I tell you, in my case, seems like there's been a lapse of time that it's very long, but it's only a few years. But I've recently had an opportunity to look at some of the problems that the big school systems are having, and I am thoroughly aghast and again worried about how poorly we have done in terms of the big school districts in our big cities with our minority population. I mean, they are, for the most part, they're the worst they've ever been. We haven't made any gains. Kids aren't going to school, teachers aren't teaching, managers aren't managing, unions are running things, you can't fire teachers. The one success that's happening that is kind of interesting is the charter school concept is much bigger and much more alive than I ever thought it would be. And you have some major school districts that half the kids are going to charter schools now, not 20 years ago. And that means that they've had a terrible problem for that to happen. And here in New Mexico, charter schools had a big blip went up under Governor Richardson. I don't know the fate now, but I can tell you in Washington, D.C., just watching it, they're up around 40%, 45%, are not under the jurisdiction of the superintendent of schools because they're under somebody, some other people, little charter schools and the like. My son founded 2 of them in the slums of Washington, D.C. So along with all the other problems, if you think we don't have the problems of maturation of a democracy, and we've got them at every place we turn, because without education we don't have the country we thought we had to compete in the world that is cherishing education, and it's thrust upon their kids, not this voluntary business. You go in China, you go in India. Anyway, forgive my blithering.
Senator, I think the charter schools are growing, but not at a great rate in New Mexico. I heard a fellow that's on the state advisory committee for education say they just approved 7 of 14 applications the other day. Under Governor Johnson, I think he received an authorization for 100 charter schools at one time in my memory. And I don't think we've even reached that in New Mexico yet. I'd be surprised if we have. There's a resistance on the part of the public schools to have charter schools here. And so you need to be aware of that. Coach, you had a question.
Yeah.
My wife Mary said, whatever you do, do not get up and say anything. I usually do what she tells me to do.
What do you say?
But you know, I've really enjoyed the informative comments here. It's really been great. As you know, I'm a former basketball coach. I'm a has-been. My critics think I never was. Well, never mind. But anyway, Pete, look, even when I was losing, Pete supported me. You probably kept me employed. I want you to know that. And I appreciate that very much. But one thing about it, in 1965, 66, when I came to New Mexico State, Ram Malley, an architect, myself, we worked together and put together the Pan American Center. And I think this is going to be a beautiful building. I'm really proud of it. I just don't want it to be bigger than Pan Am.
Thank you, Coach. Appreciate it. We have a young lady in the back. A couple of the students.
Hi, my name is Erin Griffith, and I'm a political science and communication major at Eastern New Mexico University. And I had a kind of different question for you because it's my area of study. And I was wondering, I know politicians have a love-hate relationship with the media, but are you concerned at all about the media conglomeration and the huge corporations that are in charge of our news and the fact that there are only maybe 5 major ones that we have and the spread of information to the American public?
No.
I didn't get it.
Let me take that first.
Sure, I didn't hear it, so.
Senator, she's concerned that the publications are now consolidating into large organizations, multiple TV stations, big chains, newspapers.
All right.
I actually think there's an explosion in sources of information that are available to people today that just were not available. I mean, you heard the general mention it today that there are 3.5 billion questions asked to Google every month. And so there is huge amounts of information available. The thing that I'm more worried about is what I would call is segmentation. We're not all watching Walter Cronkite at 6 o'clock, right? People tend to gravitate to segments of news or issues or websites or that particularly appeal to them. And hence we're not listening to each other as much as perhaps we did in a different era. I'm also worried, frankly, about print journalism more than anything else. And we've seen large numbers of newspapers. I think there are 40 newspapers in America today that are for sale. Most of them don't have buyers. There's one city I can't remember which one it was now. Was it Grand Rapids? There's one medium-sized city in America now that no longer has a daily newspaper. And while you can get some things from the web, we all expect to get our news is free, right? From the internet. What happens to basic local reporting that you can get from a newspaper that's different from what you can get in a 10-second soundbite on television or and even radio stations are doing less local news and in-depth content. I worry about that layer of the medium more than I worry about mergers between CBS and somebody else.
Well, I concur and agree with what Heather said, but I have another observation that of concern. Actually, it seems to me that while there is a proliferation of available information, including television and cable television, and I think what's missing is true factual reporting. There's been a dramatic change in that those who are furnishing us with the news are no longer, as I see it, trying to be news givers. They're trying to be their version of news givers, and that they're not reporting facts and news as it happens, but facts as they see them and interpreted by them. So there's way too much interpretation and an awful lot of ideologically prompted information being bantered around. And I'm guessing that rather than get the right information sooner, as an average American, because of the proliferation, I think you're getting the right information later, if at all, after you've gone through all kind of rapids and fallen over and don't know what's what because of the kind of newsmakers we've got. And I don't know who's going to ever fix that. It's a dramatic change. When you put your name up there that you wrote this, it's no longer a news story. It's your byline, and you put in there what you want. And the people have to get by that one way or another. They have to walk through that mud till they get somewhere else, till they find out what's real.
Had one more question back here.
Yes, my name is Christopher Sparson, and I'm a junior here at New Mexico State University. This question kind of goes back to healthcare. Earlier in the discussion, you were talking about the proposed ideas that are in the Senate Finance Committee, and you were discussing how some of these proposals would essentially bring up costs. But isn't this why the Democrats had proposed a public option to kind of defray those costs, to kind of bring those down? And also, you hear a lot of Republican opposition to what the Democrats are trying to propose. Why don't you hear more solutions from the Republican side?
One of the things with respect to cost and one of the sources of funding for at least, I haven't looked at Senator Box's bill, but I am familiar with some of the elements of the House bill that hasn't made it all through yet. One of the sources of money that we look at for funding some of the increases in insurance coverages is Medicare, and in particular a program called Medicare Plus Choice, which or Medicare Advantage, which is a managed care version of Medicare. There are people who are strongly opposed to that approach to providing health care for seniors. Here in New Mexico, 40% of the seniors in New Mexico actually get their Medicare through the Medicare Advantage HMO. And our HMOs in New Mexico generally grew up from the community. There weren't large corporations that came in from outside. They were Presbyterian and Loveless and what was that other one?
Cimarron.
Oh, So they grew up from the faith-based community, from the nonprofit community, and very much trusted by people, and also quite low cost compared to other surrounding states. If you take a huge amount of money away from there, you're going to affect the quality of care, or the availability of care through those programs. And some of those programs will no longer be able to offer care. So there is an impact there. This is a choice that would have a significant impact, particularly in states like New Mexico. So it's not. So I am concerned about where they are getting some of their funds from. You ask why. I agree with you that I think some of the debate has kind of devolved into a shouting match as opposed to looking at alternatives. But if you're the one who's saying calmly, putting forward ideas, unfortunately, that's not usually newsworthy either.
No.
People cover a fight or somebody yelling from the floor of the House. They don't cover someone thoughtfully trying to put forward solutions. And so, and that's normal. You know, we don't go out and look at the traffic going by when it's going by smoothly. But when we hear a crash outside our window, everyone goes out to look. So often you have to dig deeper for who is proposing solutions, and do those solutions make sense?
Heather, I want to comment that Cimarron was actually a faith-based HMO as well. Every night, Kathy and I prayed that would be successful, and so it's like Presbyterian as well. Senator, any comments on that? I'm going to take one more question. Oh, maybe two more. We're having such a good time. Why aren't Republicans into this game on the positive side?
Well, you remember my story of the difference between a bill that's kind of jointly prepared and brought up a piece at a time and done jointly, and this is discarded and jointly. If you were doing a health care bill that way in the U.S. House, and the minority was not rolled over regularly where they were so limp that they didn't participate, you would have seen the various proposals come to the surface in a way that would get reported. But that's passé. What they do now is the majority is getting ready to do the rolling. I mean, roll them over, and they get the bill ready. They never talk to the other side, including the staff. It's very hard once that occurs. The bill that's prepared by the majority takes on a life of its own in the media. It's got a name, and it belongs to so-and-so. And you think a Republican in the minority with the numbers in the House can come along and match that? If they try it, they get one story, and it's over with, and probably will never have another chance. In the Senate, they might offer a bill as an amendment, substitute, when they get down there, and you might get to read it again. Well, unless the minority party, in this case the Republicans, are truly masters at public relations and have terrific amounts of backup public dissemination of information about their ideas, and have plenty of time to sit down and think through a campaign of public relations, you're not going to find out what they're for, other than at home in their district or in a meeting like this when one of them's there and he tell you about it. And how in the world is that going to affect the country? Now, a shining star may come out of it, but we didn't have any shining stars on the Republican side on the health care in the Senate. I don't think they were interested from the beginning, as I see it. And in the House, they had no chance. It was just make a little noise. You've been through that.
When I chaired the Medicaid task force, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, when the Republicans were in the majority, John Dingell and I worked together on several things during my time on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I was a very capable member. And I went to him and I said, John, I want to do something on Medicaid, and I want to do it from the center out, not from one end of the political spectrum in. And he thought about it for a while and talked to people and so forth, and at that time he had to come back and say, I can't do it. And the reason was that his leadership wanted to fight about health care, not do something about health care, even though at the time they were in the minority, and we would have been able to, I think, do some things that mattered. We wouldn't have done a humongous bill like they're doing now, but we would have done some things that mattered. But he basically was given the word that this is going to, we're going to bring the House down, and that's what they did.
Senator, I think you're well known for reaching across the aisle when you were in the minority as well as in the majority. Senator Kennedy was a good friend of yours, and you did lots of work with him. Senator Dodd was here last year and talked about the kinds of things he'd worked with you on. Senator Landrieu was here today talking about. So I think you might be a bit of an anomaly in that body, in that you were one that, regardless of whether you're majority or minority, you were willing to work with the others and share the credit with them. And so maybe what we need are more Pete Domenicis around to do that. Let me take just 2 more questions. I'm going to recognize Michael Rickenbacker, who is going to respond to, maybe 3. He's going to respond. He's the one that helped design this building, and he wants it bigger than the Pan American Center. So I'm pretty sure that's what Michael's going to talk about.
Good evening, Senator, Representative, and Governor. I have a question about us and what we can do as a community, one that's very divided. Not just the community of Las Cruces, but in our country. We're seeing what I consider to be divisive language that comes from both sides. I'm one of those radical left-wing tax and spend Democrats, but I love the dialogue that happens between the different sides. So I'd ask what you would advise a community and the community of these United States that would allow us to get together and discuss politics and enjoy what public policy conference can be about when there are differences of opinions, and how we could get back to a discussion and a conversation and not what I consider to be borderline hate speech. We deserve better than that, all of us, to work together, to come together and have a conversation, and it doesn't have to always be an argument.
Well, one is to have a school of public policy like this one. But I also, politics is about ideas. It's also about people. And there are things that people are passionate about. But there's you can disagree and do so civilly. I have to say, though, I just finished a couple of books. One of the great things about not having to have my life scheduled in 15-minute increments as I'm reading more is, I just finished April 1865, which is about Lincoln and the end of the Civil War, and in the middle of Scandal Mongers, which is about Washington. And we sometimes think that this partisanship and bickering and the viciousness of politics is a modern day phenomenon. It's not. It may change in some ways. It may change in the means in which we hear about things. But people are passionate about their ideas and what's important to them, and they fight for those things. The important thing is to fight for those things in ways that are respectful, that other people disagree, and that it is okay to disagree in this great country.
Thank you.
Well, I have a...
Senator, go ahead.
Excuse me, Governor. Let me just say, I want to talk about how different senators do things, just to show you that what a senator feels about legislation does affect the decorum, the demeanor. There are a number of Republicans that after the death of Ted Kennedy, one of them comes to mind is Orrin Hatch, about whom much is said that he passed this bill with Senator Kennedy. He worked on this bill with Senator Kennedy. Well, I was wondering when I heard so many of them, about 5 or 6, I know Orrin Hatch. I went, what the hell is this? And he got all those bills passed with Senator Kennedy. Well, here's what happened, you see. Those bills were passed during that interval that the Republicans were in control and Kennedy was in the minority. Now, you see, Kennedy didn't stop trying to get bills when he was in the minority. He went over and suckered Orrin Hatch into doing a bill with him.
Okay.
Not one, but 2, maybe 3 or 4. It was just great. Old Hatch was just rocking them through there, So,
that's good.
I'm going to tell Orrin that next time I see him, so he doesn't hear it from one of you. I don't know that happened, but I think it did. The bills he cites were bills that did pass the Senate when we were in the majority. Yeah. And sure enough, Kennedy didn't get to sit over there and pout. He was on the floor making a few deals, and they changed the bill. They changed it to get him on board, even though we were in control. Of course, we didn't have 63 senators or something. They could filibuster, so the minority was important. That's one thing. And then I want to tell you something about what happened on the floor with Kennedy and me. We were down there one evening, just 2 of us, maybe 3. We were arguing 6:30 to 7:30 and thereabouts. The Senate's finished, and you stick around if you had something that you didn't get done, and you want to yell a little. You stay right after that. Everybody's left, and you don't get home too late that way. And so he was over there on his side. He's never changed seats from the time he arrived. He took one of his brother's seats, and with seniority, they moved around. He stayed over there. When he talks, he has a tendency, even more so than your senator, their former senator Pete Domenici, he yells, and when he yells, the blood vessels that God gave him are very close to the surface of his face, And so he gets red. So the more he yells, the redder he gets. The redder he gets, the more he yells. And pretty soon it's just this red face over there. And I'm over here on this side. I'm doing the same thing, and I have a tendency to get red. And my wife is watching this from home and up the street. She does that quite often. She watched us here on what's your
Webcast.
Yeah, webcast, and said she got it live. She watched everything that occurred. She thought it was terrific. But anyway, my wife called the cloakroom when I finished one of my tirades and was read and wanted me to go to the cloakroom. So I said to Senator Kennedy, I'm going to leave the floor. Excuse me, you're going to stay here? Fine, I'm going to go talk to somebody. I left and went over there, and my wife left me a message. Call her at home, urgent. I called her, and she said, I want to tell you that you're getting to red in the face and yelling so loud. If you think that's impressing people, they'll get a lot more out of it if you hush up and talk with a calm voice. I said, really? I thought the more I was really getting the message across. She said, no, you can't. You're too wild when you're like that. I said, okay, thank you, dear. Thank you. Well, I love you lots. Go. I went out there. I got the floor, and I said to Senator Kennedy, I had to leave the floor a little while ago because I had a message. It was my wife, Nancy. He said, oh, Nancy, she's great. He said, what else about it, Pete? He said, well, she left me a message. She said for me to tell you. She said to tell you that the more you yelled, the redder you got, and if you thought that impressed people, you had another thought coming. Now my wife was listening to that. Now she's mad at me, man. She called me up and said, go down there and tell them I didn't say that. I said, not on your life. That'll stick for a couple of weeks, honey, and then I'll tell them the truth.
Great story. Terry. And then I'm going to go to the provost, and then we're going to quit.
Okay. Hello. This is on. All right, I'd like for the two of you to take a shot at this. It deals with solving problems. I agree completely, Heather, with what you said a minute ago about how strongly people feel about their opinions. But let's just talk about solving problems for a minute. There are huge problems in this country to solve in terms of health care and security, workforce, the list goes on. And they're complicated and they're tough. Do you think Congress has lost its ability to solve problems? And if the answer is yes, then what are we going to do? If the answer is no, then what's going to happen to change this so that we can start solving this country's problems?
Yeah. Well, I'll go first for a couple of minutes. That's a subject matter for a long evening, and we've talked about it, around about it a little bit, and I brought it up sort of early on when I said, can we cope? Can Congress cope? That's sort of the thing we're talking about. But I think it's reached a point where on the biggest issues, the big ones, maybe the big three, big four, led by debt, deficits, that I don't think Congress is going to be able to solve it in a conventional way, a way that they exercise their legislative prowess as given to them in the Constitution and built up over precedent, etc. I think that won't work. But I think they're going to be involved in that they're going to give the authority to somebody to do something that will make it easier for Congress to then pass something or let something pass. It's going to be some kind of commission or commissions or a commission that's staged. Now, just as I say it, I don't say it with great passion. I think it stinks, but I don't see any other way. And if I were there, I'd be leading the parade to try to get the right instrument drawn that would say, we got 18 months to get this done, and eventually Congress would get very much involved, and that kind of instrument would be a legislative masterpiece. We'd hope it would be simple, but it might not be able to be simple, and therefore it may be debated a long time, so what you're given to whom to work on what. Now, is it really that tough? You bet. I tell you, when we tried to, in the Reagan years and a couple others when he was not there and I was on our side in the Senate, we were trying to take a little bite out of the entitlement program. The first one we tried to take a bite out of was Social Security. Because the budget was going broke and Social Security Trust Fund was getting less and less reserved, and we could tell the way to get this curve down some was to do something on the automatic entitlement of Social Security. So we tried to cut the 1 year's cost of living index in half for 1 year, not for 10 years like it's going to have to happen, for 1 year. And it became just a firestorm. We had to wheel Pete Wilson in from the hospital where he'd had an appendix removed. And we were 1 vote short mid-morning of Thursday or something. Brought him in a wheelchair. He had that bottle where they're feeding him water or whatever it is. He looked like he was half dead. And he voted aye. And we passed it, and then and it was a damn good bill, good budget. And sure enough, we thought we had Ronald Reagan on our side because we'd negotiated it with his Secretary of the Treasury, and the House Republicans bombarded us with stink bombs for weeks, led by Trent Lott, great Republican leader, and then Reagan met with O'Neill and changed his mind. And after we voted it with death on the floor, we had the president turn on us, and we lost 5 senators and didn't get anything. We lost 5 senators in the election. They claimed that we lost them because of that. We may have lost 2 of them because of that. But while we worked on these things, I invented a word that I will just throw out to you to show you how serious the problem is. The word that I came up with was simultaneity. I don't know if that's a word. Simultaneous means at the same time, and simultaneity was the test whereby both sides put up their hand at the exact same time. And that's simultaneity, and that means we can take a picture of that and prove to everybody that you all voted for it at the same damn time.
So now we've come up with a structure. We've come up with a structure, simultaneity, that when we tackle these difficult questions, everybody's hand goes up at the same time.
It.
We're not going to wait to see how the other guy does. Let me ask the provost back here.
Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, I just want to perhaps voice what I think is a quiet sentiment in the room, and that is one of profound admiration for the 3 extraordinary public servants that we have in front of this. And I hope that the majority of them would consider running again for office.
Well, I think you'll have a tough time getting a majority up here, but you've heard me say, Kathy says I can do anything I want to after the divorce.
I knew I would tease the governor with that one. Secondly, I also wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to thank all of you who have participated in this extraordinary conference, starting with our wonderful planning team, the individuals who have volunteered and who have invested such an enormous number of hours and energy behind this extraordinary effort. So to all of you...
Would you give them a hand? Yes.
And finally, I know that we have been discussing some very present topics, but there's hope. There's hope. And in this room, we have students, we have faculty, we have opinion leaders, and there is no question in my mind that the nation that has been the greatest example of democracy and the wonderful things that humankind can accomplish, we can also, again, conquer these terrible issues that we have in front of us. So what I was thinking is, in closing, and before we meet before next year, and between now and then, and since you have made us think out loud, so many wonderful things, and our presenters have been so extraordinary. I have a special request for the senator, and you have shared with us before some wonderful lessons in a story. And I was wondering if Senator Domenici can repeat again for the audience that story about the farmer and the chicken.
I don't know.
Farmer, is the one, I've heard you tell the one about the Tier C. What, I don't remember that one.
The chicken that was chirping.
Oh, the little bird. No, it wasn't a chicken, it was a little bird. I don't want to give everyone tonight that I only know 4 or 5 funny things. I told you 3 of them. I'll save this one till another time.
I've heard him tell it. I know which one you're talking about. And I would tell Dr. Peach, you just heard from the provost there is hope on your salary. You came by. That we've now gone from esteem to hope. I'm going to ask.
Could I just say, since everybody here, I mean, a lot of people here know me fairly well, and you understand that I kind of was out of circulation for a little while, and you've heard me. I'm supposed to tell you, when you ask me how I am, I'm supposed to tell you I'm fine. Things are just great, and that's my wife's instruction. Because if I start talking about what's wrong, I go on forever. And she says, really, people aren't that damn interested, honey, in how that whole story. So just be brief. But I do want to tell you that I had a very interesting operation, because I had in addition to some other pains like these fingers, which have been 12 years of pain, my shoulder didn't work. I had arthritis so bad that I had my shoulder replaced. And you've seen some people with shoulder replacements, and it takes them a long time to get well after the operations. But I had a new kind, and just take a minute, but it's called a reverse shoulder replacement. It's only 4.5 years old in America. It came from England, and the surgeon did it for me is over at Johns Hopkins. He started them right after our FDA let us have them. England's had them a long time. They put one big bone back in here backwards. That's why it's called reverse. And you get a little bit less mobility, but you get well very quickly. So that at 2 months and 3 weeks, I'm just about there, and I've done no exercise, no physical therapy, literally none. In fact, they don't want you to, because these things got to stick, and they got to grow. So in about 4, 5, 6 months, they'll see which muscles have to be developed, and they'll let me do that. But in the meantime, I just can't lift up very, very much. 5 pounds, well, I don't know what 5 pounds is, so I just got to be scared. I don't do much. First, they told me no more than a coffee cup. How the hell do I know what I'm lifting up a coffee cup? So I decided to lift very little. But the other thing is, if I fall down and this goes back here, then I'll probably break one of those things off, and I won't come see you for another year. But this is totally well. As far as everything goes, couldn't be happier. But I have a lot of other orthopedic problems that they found in my back and elsewhere. So from time to time, I get down on myself, and I'm not so sure I want to go to work every day and want to do things. But you all claim that we've been helpful to you. I want to say just being down here and participating has been helpful to me. So I'm not sure I want to overstate the case how helpful. I'm not totally well or anything, but I mean, I feel all right, Governor. And I think we're going to make something happen that's beautiful. In my opinion, at the higher education level, there's all kinds of shortcomings one can talk about. But for our state, one of the biggest shortcomings is that our population and our young students are not familiar with free enterprise and capitalism. In essence, they just don't understand business. And as a result, we're about the least business-oriented state in the Union. And we don't have very many young people that understand it. And so I'm for a university that has a superb school of business, not just a school of business, but a super one. And so I'm not sure that New Mexico State can do it. It's a small school. It's remote from the center of population. But I put my oar in the boat with them when I decided to do this institute, and built around, it's going to be built within what we hope will be a new complex. And I think the School of Business is growing here, and I wanted to, my dream is it'll be great beyond what I put here, and I chose to put all of my papers and documents, whatever you call it, they brought them down here in some big vans, huh? And if they sorted those out, I told them they could have a junk heap for about 2/3 of them, but they kept every one. I don't know what for. Pieces of paper, you can't read my writing and script, but they got them all. So maybe we need a few more years, and we'll get the new school, if you can find a little extra money somewhere. If I were back there, I could get you some money, but I'm not relevant anymore. I mean, I'm good at events like this, but as far as Washington and the Capitol is concerned, I don't do much up there. So I just want to say thanks to you all. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Congresswoman, would you like to close with a comment with our friends who dropped in for a cocktail tonight?
Thank you all. Drive safe.
They didn't get that many cocktails. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for your attendance. I thought it was a great public policy conference. We look forward to seeing you again, and thanks to all those people who made it happen. Good night.
The preceding was a production of New Mexico State University. The views and opinions in this program are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the NMSU Board of Regents.